challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. And normally, I announce at this time, this is Monday, 10 a.m. In the East Coast of the United States, and everybody pencils down, coffee pots down, breakfast down, everything. Pay attention to our live stream. But as you can see, Peter isn't here. And unfortunately, as is often the case these days, there are internet issues in Russia, and so Peter's unable to join. It might change during the live stream, but as things stand, Peter's not going to be able to join. So we'll do an abbreviated version of the live stream with just me going solo. So please bear with me. Those who join me regularly on Tuesdays and Thursdays evening will already be used to my doing them solo. But I know there are people who come in on Mondays and they like Peter and they want to hear from Peter. So to them, I apologize. Anyway, there are a couple of things that I want to address. And first of all, there's always somebody says here, I was just about to put on tea. Well, I mean, probably not the best time now. You got to now focus. You'll be able to get your tea when this is over. Somebody said, oh, awesome program about revisionism earlier. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Anyway, so on the Greenland issue, we have the Europeans continuing to fulminate. And this is developing into one of these huge transatlantic crises. Among the biggest. I mean, maybe there've been a number of big transatlantic crises in the past, but the previous transatlantic crisis tended to be fairly substantive issues. So when there was the crises over, let's say, the gas pipeline deal of the 1980s, when the Europeans signed gas deals with the USSR, and the Trump administration was not the Trump, the Reagan administration, going back a way, the Reagan administration was very displeased with the Europeans and also threatened them with sanctions and punishment and so on. Someone says, could have had Annalena B in place of Peter. Really? I don't know whether she would be happy to come on. I'd be happy to have Annalena Baerbock to come on, but I don't think she's going to do it. but yeah, so that was the crisis over the gas pipeline deal in the 80s, which was a serious rift, and there were lesser crises. There were nuclear weapons and so on. But this has developed into quite a serious crisis, and it's when I say it's not very substantive, because ultimately, who really cares who owns an almost uninhabitable piece of land, Greenland? So and the United States, even if it doesn't own it, has pretty much all rights of a owner. Putting whatever armed forces into the territory that it's had it through the 1951 agreement that he signed with Denmark. So it doesn't seem on the face of it to be anything very substantial. But strangely enough, the Europeans have decided to make a stand. And when you make a stand against Trump, then Trump himself, digs in his heels. And so now it's becoming quite a quite tense confrontation. So we had the lengthy truth that Trump sent out on Saturday, which we discussed with Peter yesterday. But Trump added to that by sending out another truth, about Denmark. And so let's first of all take a look at what he said. And in this, the truth. Here it is. It's very for this time. It was very brief, and he says NATO has been telling Denmark for 20 years that you have to get the Russian threat away from Greenland. Unfortunately, Denmark has been unable to do anything about it. Now it is time, and it will be done. Now, as I pointed out before, when we talk about Denmark and the arguments that Denmark is making as to why it should retain its ownership, there's the peculiarity is that the Danish Prime Minister, Mette Frederiksen, and we've talked about her quite often here at the Gaggle, has been among the most ardent Russophobes in Europe, and has repeatedly claimed that Russia poses a huge threat to Denmark. And of course, by implication, if Russia poses a huge threat to Denmark, then Russia must pose a huge threat to Greenland. I mean, Greenland's a lot bigger and a lot more important, at least strategically, than Denmark is. So she's been saying all this, but now she has to change her argument by and suggest that, well, Russia really isn't such a great threat. This is all being exaggerated by Donald Trump. There's no Russian threat. No Russian threat. But there's a problem. You got to make up your mind. I mean, either there's a Russian threat or there isn't a Russian threat. Now Trump is now saying, yeah, there's a Russian threat, just as Mette Frederiksen up until 2 weeks ago was insisting, yeah, there's a huge Russian threat, and Trump saying, yeah, there's a huge Russian threat. That's why we need Greenland, because there's such a huge Russian threat, as Mette Frederiksen has repeatedly said. So Mette changed her argument. Said, oh no, there really isn't. There's no justification for taking Greenland away from us. There's the Russians and the Chinese. No, they don't pose any kind of threat. So you can see here the opportunism. Now the way the Europeans have conducted themselves by challenging Trump, and in particular by sending their forces to Greenland to say, well, we're taking security of Greenland very seriously. By doing that, they have really infuriated Trump. If they thought that by sending forces to Greenland, they were in some ways keeping Trump happy, then they made a major miscalculation. Now Trump is really angry because now it seems, wait, they're openly defying me, and he issued those the threat to the tariffs, 10% tariffs, will come into effect as of February the 1st, so in a couple of weeks, and then if the European leaders don't stick their head under a cold tap and come to their senses, there's going to be an additional tariff. So it's going to go up to 25% as of the 1st of June. So when the weather's a little warmer. So then listen. Now the Europeans are having these meetings and they're issuing statements, and issuing now threats that they're going to retaliate with tariffs of their own against the United States. So let's again take a look here. First of all, but this is among the more conciliatory European leaders, which is the British, because the British always want to keep in with the Americans. That's how Britain has traditionally been able to punch above its weight in world affairs because of its close relationship. And the British always refer to the special relationship, and whenever the Americans meet the British, the Americans, politely always say, yeah, it's a really special relationship. It's very, very special. It's really, really special. But of course, it isn't anything special. The Americans, as always, and reasonably take what they can get, and they're always basically thinking about what is in the Americans' interest, and not in the interests of the British. So anyway, here's Keir Starmer earlier today, and let's watch him a little bit. I know it's a little hard to take, but this is part of one's Monday ordeal.
Directly, respectfully, and with a focus on results. On Greenland, the right way to approach an issue of this seriousness is through calm discussion between allies. And let's be clear, the security of Greenland matters. And it will matter more as climate change reshapes the Arctic, as sea routes open and strategic competition intensifies. The High North will require greater attention, greater investment, and stronger collective defense.
Collective.
The United States will be central to that effort, and the UK stands ready to contribute fully alongside our allies through NATO. But there is a principle here that cannot be set aside, because it goes to the heart of how stable and trusted international cooperation works. And so any decision about the future status of Greenland belongs to the people of Greenland and the Kingdom of Denmark alone. That right is fundamental, and we support it.
All right. So now I know that I often point this out, and and I know it gets boring, and but nonetheless, it does have to be pointed out. Is that principle that it's entirely up to the people of the Kingdom of Denmark and the people of Greenland alone to decide what happens in Greenland? That was the very principle that Europe strenuously denied when it came to the theft, outright theft of Kosovo in 2008. No matter how often the Serbs insisted, "Hey, Kosovo is an integral part of Serbia. It's recognized in international law that Kosovo is a part of Serbia." The Russians also, they continued to diplomatically support the Serbs and said, "No, it's we have a UN Security Council resolution that specifies that Kosovo is a part of Serbia." And the Europeans, and of course the Americans, there was the George W. Bush administration, and the Americans said, "Well, the hell with you. I mean, we're just gonna say that the Serbs have no say in this theft of Kosovo." And they rushed to recognize the unilateral Declaration of Independence, which, of course, itself is a violation of international law, which is that you can't, that any unilateral secession, recognition of unilateral secession is a violation of the basic principles of the friendships among nations. And there's a famous 1970 UN General Assembly resolution specifically forbidding states from recognition of unilateral secession. That in doing so is an unfriendly act. In other words, it's essentially almost like a declaration of war if you recognize a part of another state as independent. So the Europeans don't have a leg to stand on. And then when you start looking at all the other actions that the Europeans have taken, just in recent years, we don't have to go, a long way back. Well, let's see. Britain took part in the bombing of Syria. What international law applied in that case? Britain took part in the bombing of Libya. What international law applied there? Britain took part in the invasion of Iraq. What international law applied there? So, you're not, Britain and the other European states who all signed on to all of these actions without any condemnation, they're not in a very strong position. And of course, only very recently, the same Trump, whom they, now they're fulminating against, the same Trump, essentially attacked unprovoked, launched an unprovoked attack on Venezuela, and seized and abducted the acting, no, the duly elected head of state. So thereby violating, I don't know how many international laws. I mean, too numerous to count. And then of course, when we remember the last June's attack on Iran, also unprovoked, also in violation of international law. Again, the British and all the Europeans signed off on it, and Friedrich Merz, Schmerz, they declared that the Israelis, and of course then by the Americans, are doing the dirty work for us. So, when you repeatedly ignore international law, then you're not in a good position suddenly to invoke it when it's your ox that's being gored. So that's why I'm not taking any of these protestations of the Europeans seriously at all. Now, during this week, because this is the week of Davos, so we're going to have Trump in Davos, which is a kind of now a big event. So Trump will be in Davos, and there he presumably meet with various European worthies. I'm sure they'll all troop off to Davos in order to try to persuade Trump not to take Greenland away from them. And they on Thursday, I think it'll be 7 p.m. Central European time, so just before the start of my Thursday live stream, there will be a meeting, a big, another one of these big meetings among in the European Council to discuss a joint response to Trump's tariffs and to Trump's insistence on taking Greenland. So, here is the story. Where are we? Yeah. So here is the this was the truth that was sent out, but Trump wasn't content with that. He then wrote a letter to the Norwegian prime minister. So Norway is one of the countries, one of the 8 countries that Trump hit with tariffs over the weekend, because Norway has been speaking out loudly against what Trump's doing. So here we have this is from PBS. It says new POTUS letters, president's letter to Jonas Gahr. I hope that's the right pronunciation. Links the Nobel Peace Prize to Greenland, reiterates threats, and is forwarded by the NSC staff to multiple European ambassadors in Washington. I obtained the text from multiple officials. So just to make that clear, Trump has written a letter to Norway's prime minister, and this is being passed along to various ambassadors. And then, so dear ambassador, President Trump has asked that the following message shared with Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre be forwarded to your named head of government of state. So, all right, so this is the letter. And dear Jonas, considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, So that's another reason for taking Greenland, apparently, which is that Norway did not give Trump the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus. I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant. but can now think about what is good and proper for the United States of America. So up until now, apparently, Trump hadn't really given much thought to what's good and proper for the United States of America. He'd only been thinking about peace. Who'd have thunk, after he's, he attacks on Venezuela and Iran. But okay. Denmark cannot protect that land from Russia or China. And why do they have a right of ownership anyway? This is real philosophic questions here. There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we have had boats landing there also. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Thank you, President DJT. So, there is, so what do they mean by right of ownership? There are no written documents. It's only that a boat landed there hundreds of years ago, but we have had boats landing there also. I have done more for NATO than any other person since its founding, and now NATO should do something for the United States. The world is not secure unless we have complete and total control of Greenland. Now, what's interesting here is, of course, there's people are fuming about what Trump has said. However, there is a point that he makes. Well, what does it mean that you have ownership? Again, bring up the issue of Kosovo. That was a part of Serbia. Well, then it wasn't, and yeah, that was it. Borders change all the time. There isn't some primal allotment of land that God assigned to certain people and then said, you will hold it in perpetuity. I mean, they change all the time. We're really going to go into the question of who has the rights to what when we come to the Middle East, when we come to what Israel, all the land that Israel has seized over the years, obviously in open violation of innumerable UN Security Council resolutions, and yet the Europeans, and of course especially the Americans, have been very much content with that. Not been making too many protests, and then of course you have the the colonial possessions. Countries had colonies. They took them over. They made some legal argument for it and say, okay, well, that's ours. And then they didn't. I live in Hungary, as you know. The Kingdom of Hungary was about 3 times the size of what Hungary is today. Not too long ago, all the way right up until 1918, the Kingdom of Hungary was a very large country in the center of Europe. Now, let's say it's about a third of its size. So borders change, and no one gets to keep what he has in perpetuity. So when Trump says, "Well, yeah, I mean, your boat landed there, that's your claim," why should I respect that? So yeah, he makes that argument. Then somebody says, "Well, we Magyars began in Asia and northern Uzbekistan." Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's history. History is the story of people moving. They move from one place to another, set up a state, and then hope that others are not going to start making claims on that state or on the territory held by that state. Well, usually someone is going to come and start making claims, which is what the Trump, in some, he has a very basic, very crude way of expressing himself, but in itself is not an unreasonable point. Now, how do you hold on to it? Well, if you have the strength, if you're strong enough, then you can hold on to it. If you're not strong enough, then you start talking about international law, and you hope that people are going to respect it. But again, I come back to the case of Serbia. Serbia talked a lot about international law, and Russia also said, well, it's international law. But that didn't help Serbia very much because Serbia was up against much stronger powers and said, well, we don't care about your international law. We're just going to take Kosovo. And that's all there is to it. So same thing happened with Hungary. Hungary could not hold on to that kingdom, the very, very impressive kingdom, and had to accept what was doled out to Hungary at Trianon. So there it is. It's that's that's human history. Anyway, let's continue with this the response to this letter of Trump. Well, if you're not going to give me the Nobel Peace Prize, I'm not going to concern myself with peace. That's it. I'm just not going to do it. Up until now, I was really concerned with peace, but now that you haven't given me my Peace Prize, I'm gonna be thinking about what's good for America. Anyway, so we have the New York Times reporting the Norwegian Prime Minister's response. So here's the headline: Denied Peace Prize, Trump tells Norway he'll push for Greenland. In a text message, President Trump told Norway's Prime Minister he no longer felt obliged to think purely of peace and that the world would not be secure until America controlled the island. And then Mr. Storr, that's the Norwegian Prime Minister, said in a statement that Mr. Trump's text message was a response to a message that Mr. Storr sent to Mr. Trump on Sunday asking to speak to him about the crisis over Greenland and about Mr. Trump's threat of using tariffs to pressure Denmark into selling Greenland to the United States, which Denmark has refused to do. So this is the sequence of events, according to the Norwegian Prime Minister. He puts in a call to Trump. That infuriates Trump. And then Trump then sends a note telling him, hey, you denied me my Peace Prize. I'm not going to talk to you. We could have had a nice conversation, when I went to collect my Peace Prize. Now, I have no interest in talking to you. As regards the Nobel Peace Prize, I have on several occasions clearly explained to Trump what is well known, namely that it is an independent Nobel committee and not the Norwegian government that awards the prize. Well, you can go on explaining it, fine. And then here we have the Telegraph. The Telegraph is fuming and ranting and raving. The Telegraph is a very neocon publication, and their obsession, of course, is Russia. We have to maintain the front against Russia, and so they're very angry with Trump. And so he says Europe threatens to strike back against Trump over Greenland tariffs. A diplomatic source told the Telegraph on Sunday night that the EU was readying 93 billion euros in retaliatory tariffs against the US exports to the bloc. Mr. Trump announced on Saturday that he would impose on blah, blah, blah. And then in emergency talks between EU envoys in Brussels on Sunday night, Emmanuel Macron, the French president, urged member states to activate the bloc's trade bazooka to restrict U.S. firms' access to the single market in response to the threats. On Sunday, Sir Keir Starmer told Mr. Trump that he should not punish Britain for opposing his attempt to acquire Greenland and said putting tariffs on European countries for pursuing collective security of NATO allies is wrong. So this is quite an interesting point, and I want to emphasize this because there's been a number of in particular the Telegraph, which, as I said, they have this thing about we need to be taking on Putin, and this was something that Kaya Kallas, she sent out a tweet saying, "Oh, Putin is really laughing at us. Russia and China are laughing at us. This spat, this transatlantic spat, is only emboldening Putin. And so the Telegraph has another article written by someone says, "Hey, what is the bazooka?" That's it's a weapon system. It's a nice thing. Nice. You project it through the air. Quite a nasty thing, the bazooka. And so here's the foreign affairs editor of the Telegraph. Here it is. This Trump has just handed Putin a prize he's wanted for 40 years. 40 years, the Kremlin failed to fracture NATO during the Cold War. That unity is now being tested from Washington. So Trump is doing Putin's dirty work. The Soviet Union spent more than 40 years trying to achieve what has just been handed to Vladimir Putin on a plate. So now I'm confused of which 40 years we're talking about. The 40 years since I don't know since when. I guess just after World War II until the mid 80s. But then we had the 40 years of Putin. So I don't know which 40 years. So there's a kind of overlapping 40 years here. 40 has just handed to Vladimir Putin on a plate. Throughout the Cold War, the Kremlin's primary objective was to split the Atlantic Alliance by turning America and Europe against one another. Every crisis over the security of West Berlin, from the Soviet ultimatum for the West to leave the city in 1958 to the building of the Berlin Wall, was designed to open cracks in NATO. To make the West scream, "I squeeze on Berlin," Nikita Khrushchev said. And of course, Nikita Khrushchev didn't say anything of the sort. Now, this is the Telegraph. And of course, it's all nonsense. Okay, anyone who knows the history of the Cold War will know what the Berlin crisis was about. The Berlin crisis was about that the Soviets were failing to establish a state in East Germany because the East Germans were able to leave the country through the Berlin Wall. And so long as the Berlin Wall was there, before the wall, they were able to go through that through the division into West Berlin. So that was before the building of the wall. They could just leave through the Allied checkpoints and then go straight to West Germany and live in West Germany. And so this was preventing, because anyone who had any skills or education in East Germany would just simply go to Berlin and then head off into West Germany. And clearly the East German government, the Walter Ulbricht, was continued to complain to Khrushchev. So it wasn't even the Soviets who were pushing for this. It was Walter Ulbricht. So they continued to complain to the Soviets is that, hey, we're losing our manpower. We can't sustain this country if all our scientists or our engineers or our teachers, doctors, continue to head towards West Germany. So that was what the Berlin crisis, and then once they built the Berlin Wall, to the wall which surrounded West Berlin, then the crisis abated. There was now no longer a constant drain of population leaving East Germany. So that was now. So this article then goes on that here's the article. Yeah, so that his successor Leonid Brezhnev deployed a new generation of nuclear missiles, the SS-20s, in the satellite states of Central Europe, precisely to divide the West over how to respond. Now, this, of course, is also deeply incorrect. The Soviets never deployed the SS-20s in Eastern and Central Europe. It never happened. And no one ever claimed that that happened. The SS-20s were deployed inside the Soviet Union. They never moved them into Eastern Europe, but doing so would have been a major change in Soviet policy, deploying nuclear missiles inside Eastern Central Europe. That never happened, even though the Americans deployed nuclear missiles in on the territories of Western Europe, but the Soviets never did so. But then you see here, this is the way they make up history. You don't have to like the Soviet Union. You don't have to like the Soviet leaders, but you should at least maintain some measure of historical accuracy as to what actually happened during the Cold War. But anyway, the Telegraph then says, well, but this is now where Khrushchev and Brezhnev failed. You know, where you can see where it's going. Where Khrushchev and Brezhnev failed, Putin has succeeded. So it's all about Putin. Amazing. We have this transatlantic dispute over the territory of Greenland, and it's all about Putin. And so here, just read a little bit more. And then today, thanks to Donald Trump, Putin can revel in that spectacle. He's reveling. He has spent 25 years, so now it's 25. We had 40 years, but now it's 25 years. All right. He has spent 25 years pursuing the old Soviet policy of trying to split the West. Time and again, he has denounced NATO for supposedly trying to encircle or terrorize Russia, as if the very existence of the Atlantic Alliance posed a threat to world peace, and as though the sight of sovereign countries choosing to join its ranks somehow justified his aggression. As if. Yeah, you see, that is exactly what NATO was doing. Yeah, encircling Russia. Yeah, there's no question of that. 6 countries, no less than 6 countries that have borders with Russia are members of NATO. And what NATO was trying to do was, of course, to go for the big prize, which was Ukraine and Belarus. And then Russia is completely surrounded by NATO. And as if the very existence of the Atlantic Alliance posed a threat to world peace. Well, yeah, you see, because almost all of the warlike acts of war in since the end of the Cold War have all come about as a result of NATO. Was NATO's bombing of Yugoslavia, NATO's bombing of Libya, NATO's expansion into the former Soviet territories led to a war in Georgia, led to a war in Ukraine. So yeah, I mean, the factual record is NATO has been a force for instability. But I wanted to point out this is how, in that kind of the British are even more kind of neocon than are the Americans when it comes to that. So anyway, just want to continue there with this the European threats. And Politico, which is always very close to the political elites in Europe, is a big booster of the political elites in Europe, saying that the Europeans are now planning their own defense. They're really gonna do it this time. They're gonna actually develop their own independence from the United States. This is it's always hilarious. It's like like the obstreperous teenager who is threatening to leave the parental home and starts issuing threats. Well, I'm definitely going to leave any minute now. I'm definitely going to leave. And the parents are saying, "Well, please, can it be now?" But we got to discuss it first. So here's this is the story in Politico, and it says Trump's Greenland threats push Europe toward divorcing America. With NATO thrown into question, some officials see the coalition of the willing as the basis for a new alliance without the U.S. New alliance without the U.S. I mean, I mean, there was an opportunity to do that in 1989. I mean, they didn't do it then for an obvious reason, because NATO was just a wonderful racket for the Europeans, do nothing. And the Americans are just going to pick up the tab. I mean, so they didn't want to do it, and they just assumed that the Americans would just go on picking up the tab and ask for nothing in return. So Americans would pay for NATO, risk American security, because if there's a shooting war with Russia, as it's quite possibly will happen over Ukraine, it's America that's going to be doing the fighting. I mean, it's not going to be the Baltic Chihuahuas that's going to do it. And so here, in private, dismayed European officials describe Trump's rush to annex a sovereign Danish territory as, quote, crazy and, quote, mad, asking if he's caught up in his warrior mode after his Venezuelan adventure, and saying he deserves Europe's toughest retaliation. It's going to be very tough for what many see as a clear and unprovoked attack against allies on the other side of the Atlantic. And then, barring a radical shift in the approach of the United States, this process seems likely to end in a radical reshaping of the West. You keep, crossing your fingers. Really? Are we really going to get this radical reshaping? That's kind of exciting. We've been waiting for this. To bring this whole, transatlantic gravy train to an end. Radical reshaping of the West that would upend the global balance of power. The implications range from transatlantic economic damage as trade tensions rise to security risks and so on. They would likely be costs to the United States as well, such as its ability to project hard power into Africa and the Middle East without access to the network of bases, airstrips, and logistical support that Europe currently provides. Now, of course, that's all very true, but of course, the Americans are quite ingenious, and they will find alternative ways of projecting power. So they'll find, well, we can't use this base here, we'll use a base somewhere else. And the British, and we saw Keir Starmer earlier, the British have no intention of closing bases down, or I mean, it's just not going to happen. So even I don't know who's going to be closing these bases. Germany is never going to have any falling out with the Americans. So I just don't know. Poland certainly isn't going to do that. Hungary isn't going to do that. So I kind of wonder who are these Europeans who are sort of making all these whispering. I mean, maybe Kaja Kallas, but I don't know whether Estonia really rests at the heart of the American transatlantic architecture. So here is this Politico continues. Anyway, their approach for the past year has mostly been to keep calm and respond to his policy actions rather than taking the bait of his provocative words. That ethos has oiled the wheels of the Ukrainian peace process. And by oiling the wheels, and there's no peace process. I mean, this is Politico kind of language, which is the opposite of the truth. It's oiled the wheels of the prolongation of this unnecessary war. There's no peace process. What they call the peace process is getting America locked in to a perpetual military commitment to Ukraine. That's the peace process. With the coalition of the willing closing in on a framework for a peace plan that the U.S. is signed up to, including American security guarantees for Ukraine, which haven't been issued. This marks a significant achievement given that Trump earlier ruled out the U.S. military playing a role. And as I've said many times before, if you're going to do that, if you're going to say, well, we got the Americans, we got them locked in on Ukraine, what they call the peace process, we got them locked into the security guarantees for Ukraine, then the Americans are going to come back and ask for a price. They said, well, you've got to pay for that. And I don't mean by, with money, but you have to pay. You're going to have to give something up. if you want us to continue with this war, if you want us to issue Ukraine with these security guarantees. And that's what I said. Yeah, we want something from you. Well, what do you want? We want Greenland. So if they can't always say, oh, well, we got the Americans locked in. Fantastic. And now the Americans say, now you're going to have to pay. And so this thing continues. Oh, look, great achievement. This was a significant achievement. Well, okay, well, you got the significant achievement. Now pay up. But Trump's hell raising over Greenland has now tipped the balance. Gone is the softly approach to the American president's threats. Again, we have sort of the Baltic Chihuahuas. The whole idea that we have, that they get to lecture the United States. They get to tell America what to do. Even Starmer, normally the most circumspect of leaders, called out the president's tariffs threat as wrong, including apparently in the direct call with Trump on Sunday. Yeah, but he also said, we've got to maintain dialogue among allies. The Greenland crisis has focused mind on the question of how to move on without America by their side. All right. And then this format could potentially become the seedbed for a new security alliance in an era when the US no longer supports NATO and European security. A new arrangement wouldn't exclude cooperation with America, but nor would it take it for granted. This is fantastic, but you don't have to put it in a threatening way. You should have been thinking about this like circa 1965 rather than, in 2026. Basically, you couldn't go on with that arrangement that you came to in the years immediately after World War II and think that this is going to go on forever. So you should have been thinking about that. You should certainly have been thinking about that after the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact. But now you're putting it in the form of a threat. Well, if that's the way you're going to play it, then we're going to think about our own security. But of course, they're not going to think about their own security because that's going to cost a lot of money. They don't have the money. It's a huge undertaking to build up a military-industrial complex, major armed forces. I mean, it's beyond their ability. The coalition of the willing started as being about Ukraine, said another diplomat, but it has created very close ties between some of the key people in the capitals. They have been building up trust and also aptitude to work together. They know each other by name, and it's easy to reach out and to send texts. Oh, that's nice. I want to send out some texts. You can imagine, like nice kind of buddy text. Hey, what's for lunch today? Also in the text chats with the Washington group leaders is Zelensky, which brings another intriguing idea into the mix. Ukraine is by far the most militarized country among those represented, with a huge army, a highly sophisticated drone production industry, and more expertise in the realities of fighting a war than anyone. So you can see where this is going. So what they're saying is Ukraine is going to become the leader of NATO. So we've gone from Ukraine being a member of NATO, Ukraine will actually be the leader of NATO. It's the most militarized country among those representatives, huge army, highly sophisticated drone production, and more expertise in the realities of fighting a war than anyone. So we're going to defer to Ukraine. While Ukraine has long sought membership in NATO, that now seems less of a prize than it once did, as America's promises to underpin any security guarantees grow less convincing by the day. If Ukraine's military might were to be included, when added to that of France, Germany, Poland, and the UK, the potential armed power of the coalition of the willing would be vast and would include both nuclear and non-nuclear states. So there it is. So that's the plan. We're going to move Ukraine into NATO. Basically, Ukraine, which is heavily militarized, will become the leading power in NATO. So that's going to be the upshot. I'm not sure that's going to go down particularly well on the European continent. I'm not sure people will want to have Ukraine as the essential de facto leader of this militarized Europe. But if if this were to be taken seriously, and I'm not really taking it seriously, then it's inevitable that that's where it's going to come, because Ukraine is building up its military industry, unlike other states. And Ukraine has had this experience now of fighting a war for 4 years. So they will be a kind of a de facto leader of NATO. I'm just not sure that the Europeans will particularly go for that idea, including, of course, Macron and Schmerz. Um, so, one other thing that I wanted to bring up, and somebody says it's also the most corrupt and bankrupt country. Exactly, exactly. Um, but one other thing I want to bring up is that the the Trump's failure so far to launch that bombing attack. Everyone was expecting that he was going to launch an attack last week. He sent out those truths threatening, and then seemingly at the last minute, seemingly, with Trump, is a very devious person, very deceitful person. So we never really know how seriously he was actually um, intending to bomb Iran, but nonetheless, in public, he seemed to be. And then he backed away. This, of course, has caused a great deal of moaning and consternation among the media, the mainstream media, and that goes, from the liberals to the conservatives, from NBC to CBS to Fox News. They were all expecting a bombing. Yeah, we want to bomb Iran, and it didn't happen. So so now there is real anger and frustration among all of the interventionists, and the typical response we get from the Washington Post, which is, "Hey, the Iranians were betrayed. We betrayed the Iranians." Now, during the sort of the lead up to the bombs, we had this odious character, and I don't know whether people remember him. This is David Frum. David Frum, who was, of course, the speechwriter to George W. Bush, who coined, at least he alleged that he coined the expression of the axis of evil, which included Iran, Iraq, and North Korea. And he was, of course, he's always been advocating intervention. I mean, that's his calling card. That's how he makes money. That's how he gets on. He's a pundit, very well paid. So he's always baying for war. Naturally, he has never heard a shot fired in anger. He has never served himself in the military. And of course, he'd make sure that his own children do not serve in the military. But he's always baying for war. I mean, that he's a classic neocon, there are plenty of others like that. Bill Kristol, David Brooks, they always want to bomb someone. If you're not invading Iraq, then you should be bombing Iran. But anyway, he sent out this tweet last week, and here you can see this. Don't let this be Hungary 1956 in Iran. Better to try and fail than fail because we didn't try. So don't let this be Hungary 1956 in Iran. So what he's doing there is this is the famous case of Hungary in 1956, when Hungarians, foolishly and naively, believed that somehow if they rose up against the Soviets, the communist regime in Hungary, then the Americans would come in on their behalf. I mean, now subsequently, There were investigations. Did Radio Free Europe really tell the Hungarians to rise up and then and overthrow the communists? And did they really encourage them to believe that the Americans were going to come in? And the record was mixed. I think by and large they didn't explicitly say the Americans are going to come in on your behalf. But nonetheless, it created a lot of bad feeling because, of course, the Americans weren't going to go in to Hungary. They weren't going to risk a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. And it should have been obvious to the Hungarians. It wasn't. And it ended in tragedy. And ever since then, some in the American government, at least during the Cold War, were very careful not to encourage people in Eastern Europe to believe that the United States would come in on their behalf. So Lyndon Johnson in 1968 went out of his way not to encourage the Czechs to believe that the United States was coming. Same thing happened in 1980-81. Carter and Reagan, neither of them encouraged the Poles to think that the United States was coming in. And this was sensible. And then George H.W. Bush. This is quite interesting because George H.W. Bush, who had been head of the CIA, or admittedly that was later on in the 1970s, George H.W. Bush was taken to task around about 1989 or 1990 when he was president. Well, why aren't you supporting Lithuania? The Baltic states. The Baltic states want to break away from the USSR. Why aren't you coming out and saying you are on their side, you support their liberation? And I remember, people like Norman Podhoretz, the neocons. I'm ashamed of my country. This is Norman Podhoretz, who died recently. I'm ashamed of my country. I'm ashamed of the President Bush for not encouraging the Baltic states to leave the USSR. And Bush, in response, said, I remember Hungary, and look what happened in Hungary, and that was really very bad, and I'm not going to do that again. And that was very, very interesting that Bush kind of brought this up. I think it was 1990 or 1991. He brought this up and said, yeah, we're not going to do Hungary. And so from this awful character, from the, if you recall him from the Iraq days, this awful character, this awful warmonger, brings up Hungary. Well, we don't want to do Hungary. So it's the same thing. Oh, we have to be with the people. We have to be with the people. It doesn't matter that they're going to be massacred. It doesn't matter there's going to, that it will just lead massacres, terrorism, civil war. He's happy with that. Why is he happy with that? Well, because if Iran is embroiled in a civil war, if there is mass killings, mass deaths, hey, well, that's good for Israel. Iran is imploding, thousands are getting killed. The country is just simply breaking apart. It's good for Israel. So there he is, saying we have to step in to support the Iranian people, whoever they are. Why? Because it's going to be good for Israel. And this is the poison that the neocons introduced. And of course, the mainstream media echo this. They couldn't care less about what the consequences are for Iran any more than they couldn't care less about what happens in Ukraine. Hey, tens of thousands are killed. Well, what do we care? We're all right. And so here's then the Washington Post, which then continues with this on this theme. Says Trump promised Iranians the U.S. would rescue them. Some feel betrayed. The Iranians. You see, there's a paragraph of the Iranians are rebelling against the government. In the midst of the mass uprising in Iran, President Trump vowed the U.S. would intervene if the Iranian government killed protesters. Thousands are dead. Anyway, it goes on. Reeling from a crackdown on protesters in Iran that left thousands dead, Iranians are now grappling with feelings of betrayal, confusion, and uncertainty after President Trump repeatedly promised to intervene on their behalf and then declined to do so. Feelings of betrayal, confusion, and uncertainty. So always whip up this emotional response. They were betrayed. There were feelings of betrayal. Some Iranians said in interviews that Trump's words of support had added to their determination to resist the Iranian government after protests erupted initially over dire economic conditions, and then to go on. And then exiled Iranian Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi. Now, here's the thing. They keep referring to him as the Crown Prince. He's nothing of the sort. Iran does not have a monarchy. So he's not the Crown Prince. I mean, they outlawed the monarchy, so he's not the Crown Prince. He can call himself the Crown Prince. You can call yourself anything you like. But he's not the Crown Prince, and he's not in exile. The monarchy was abolished. The Shah fled for his life. So the idea that he's sort of living in exile, basically, they don't want you back. You're not the Crown Prince, and you're not in exile. You're banished. Who had emerged as the most prominent opposition leader amid this round of unrest. He's not even in Iran. He hasn't been in Iran since 1979. He has no roots whatsoever in that country. Has called on Trump to intervene to help the people of Iran. In a statement Saturday provided by his office, Pahlavi said that it is not for me to tell President Trump what to do, but what I can say is the Iranian people would welcome targeted action against security forces killing them. Targeted action. So American targeted action, American bombs. In the end, the change will come from the Iranian people. They are the boots on the ground, but they do now need some targeted help to stop the massacres. So this is always the way they present the color revolutions and then these interventions. And and so the what they're doing. Let me just. Yeah. All right. So this is basically the way that they present this. Sorry, I just got a little bit distracted here. The color revolutions, the intervention. It's always, it's a humanitarian. We're trying to help the people. We're trying to help the people because you're not doing any help whatsoever. And then you say, well, if you have all this popular support, why do you need the United States? I mean, basically, why are you unable to basically take power? Khomeini was able to take power without getting any support from anyone. I mean, so. But it's the reason I wanted to bring this up is that this is the classic thing. Oh, they were betrayed. Now I should say that Trump behaved in a very reckless way in encouraging these people to take on the government, seize the institutions. Help is on its way. I mean, this is absolutely reckless. And behaved in a way precisely not how an American president should behave. He should have done exactly what Bush did, I think, in 1990 with the Baltic states, what Lyndon Johnson did in 1968, what Eisenhower did in 1956, which is don't encourage people essentially to get massacred and lead them to think that help is on its way. But Trump absolutely said help is on its way, exactly what you're not supposed to do. So he behaved in a reckless way. So he doesn't deserve any plaudits for that. But it's striking how this is the kind of thing that he gets praised for, by the media. And their only problem is, well, why didn't Trump do it? Why didn't Trump go ahead and bomb? Should have just bombed. As if bombs are actually going to make any difference at all in Iran. It's going to bring a change in government by bombing. It's not going to do that. And even if it did, it'll only make everything much worse. It'll be a crisis. What we should have done in '56? Yeah, we should have basically led to a mass slaughter of the Hungarians. There was nothing at all that the United States could do for the Hungarians in 1956. Absolute mass slaughter. So how many Hungarians were killed with the Soviet intervention? It would have been 10 times that number in the event of an American intervention. Anyway, let's take a look at the Gagglers, and we go to our Gaggle locals board and see all the people who try to look after the dogs, try to keep the dogs happy. The dogs feel frustrated, angry, resentful, and it's always very touching that we have Gagglers who worry about their mental and physical well-being. So thank you all, and then. Stone River, thank you so much. Stone River says everything Trump says about Greenland applies to Canada. I think I agree with you, and I think that that's what Trump himself thinks. I think Trump would absolutely, like as a kind of final prize at the end of his presidency, the acquisition of Canada. I don't know if that is feasible, but it would be quite interesting if certain provinces in Canada decided to secede and join the United States. I think that might be doable. That they might just challenge Ottawa. I mean, they're just sick to death of Carney, sick to death of Trudeau, and would like to join the United States. And particularly, they find the United States under Trump at least a much more, I don't know, let's put it this way, more vigorous and energetic country than the sort of prissy, sanctimonious Canada of Trudeau and Carney. So you're absolutely right. I think Trump would like to acquire Canada in addition to Greenland, and probably would like to help himself to Panama. So look, the borders change. It's an unfortunate fact. Borders change. And it would be quite interesting if some of these the Western provinces decided, like Alberta, decided to secede from Canada. What would Trump do? Trump may then tell Ottawa, "Don't you dare use force to prevent the secession," because obviously Ottawa would resort to force. Any government would. But if the United States says you are not to do that, you are not to use force to prevent the secession, that would create a very interesting situation between the United States and Canada. And by that's exactly, again, when we have the case of the destruction of Yugoslavia. That's what the United States did. That's what the United States actually, how they facilitated the breakup of Yugoslavia. What they actually did was to tell the central government in Belgrade, and that wasn't Milosevic, incidentally, that was Ante Markovic, who was the head of the Yugoslav government. He said, "You are not to use force to prevent the secession of Slovenia." And that's it. That ensured the secession. So it'd be kind of interesting if Washington were to use the same policy towards Ottawa. Anyway, thank you so much, Stone River. And then Carlos says, right, I don't think they want many liberal voters. Well, I think that's true if you take the whole of Canada, and that might be a little difficult, but I think it's more a matter of if you can take certain provinces, such as Alberta, so you then those would they could be integrated within the United States, but yeah, you can't really take you know, all the sort of the liberals of Canada. That wouldn't add anything to the U.S. and the U.S. wouldn't want so many liberals coming on board. So yeah, so I agree. I think it'll be a selective secession on the part of certain provinces. And then Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. And so Cynthia says here, thank you so much, Cynthia, as always, for your generosity. Cynthia says, in early 2024, Denmark's Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen, I always find it just funny whenever her name is brought up, signed a bilateral security agreement with Zelensky. Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. And it's attached. Under this agreement, Ukraine is obligated to support Denmark, including Greenland, if either are attacked. Zelensky has also signed some 30 similar agreements with Western states, and it appears one of them may be coming due. So will Zelensky have to ask Trump for more weapons to fight? Well, I think it's a very interesting, and it follows on from what that article in Politico, how Ukraine is going to become the leader of NATO in the absence of the United States. And so here, so let's just read out this tweet that Cynthia has presented. It says, Ukraine will be obligated to defend Denmark if the U.S. decides to seize Greenland by force. On February the 23rd, 2024, Denmark and Ukraine signed a bilateral security agreement which provides for mutual assistance in protecting their borders and security. So yeah, that's right. Now I am quite sure that they're going to try and get out of it. And it says, as always with these bilateral agreements, they're more statements of aspiration rather than than reality. So yes, Ukraine has signed all these agreements, bilateral. Yeah, we absolutely promise, we're going to come to your assistance. They. It's very interesting, really, to think about Zelensky's situation right now, because what he really doesn't want is this rift between America and Europe. I mean, he thinks his best shot is as long as America and Europe are together. So, although, yes, he signed this agreement with Denmark, I think Zelensky, in this confrontation, at least in the early stages, initially, he would support Trump because he wants everyone to fall into line and keep the whole Ukraine show on the road. But if of course NATO does dissolve, then yeah, I mean, I think it's quite likely that Ukraine will become the key player of this the new European security architecture. So then I think Ukraine and Denmark would draw close together. But I think initially he will be very reluctant to support the Europeans defying Trump, because I think that, hey, this is counterproductive. As he knows from his experience, you don't start defying Trump. He doesn't like that. So I think he's going to be telling the Europeans to cool it and try to keep Trump happy. See if they can work out some arrangement. It's not looking good whether they can work something out. In which case, they say, okay, give Trump whatever he wants. I mean, if you're Zelensky, what the hell do you care about who owns Greenland? Anyway, thank you, Cynthia. And then Cynthia goes on. NGOs praise Musk and Starlink for controlling what info leaves Iran. Musk signals regime change, even swapping Iran's flag on Khamenei's X account for the Shah's. Yeah, he did that. Exiled Prince Reza Pahlavi is on X urging Trump to strike and topple the government. Yep. Will Musk begin censoring content critical of Israel on X. Could be. Are there any billionaires who aren't pro-Zionist willing to fund media efforts that counter messaging supported by Musk and other pro-Israel billionaires? Well, that's a very good question. Interesting when you think about a billionaire who is not a Zionist, the one name comes obviously to mind, and it's not a name that any of us here are particularly enthusiastic about, and that's George Soros. Soros has never really been a Zionist. Soros has never been a big Israel booster. Soros, of course, is Jewish, but he's never been particularly, interested in Jewish things. I mean, he's never really engaged in any of the Jewish philanthropies, supporting Jewish causes, advocating on behalf of Jews, and especially advocating on behalf of Israel. Israel hates Soros. Netanyahu hates Soros. I mean, Netanyahu and Viktor Orban bonded over kind of mutual hatred of George Soros. So, I mean, that's a name that comes to mind. Maybe there are other billionaires who are not Zionists, but so Soros would certainly be quite happy not to, not to embrace the cause of Israel, but media organizations supported by Soros would not be. They would have all sorts of other problems attached to them. But for instance, I mean, Soros funded responsible statecraft. So he funded the Quincy Institute. I don't know whether Quincy Institute still receives money from Soros, but that's a reasonably level-headed. It's certainly not Zionist. It takes a by American standard, it takes a reasonably balanced position on the Middle East. So as I say, it was originally funded by Soros, but I don't know if Soros is still funding it. So I think that's a possibility. Now, will Musk start censoring material on Israel? Well, that's an interesting question. I guess it all depends on how serious the situation becomes. I mean, if Israel becomes embroiled in a very difficult war, and the situation becomes very fraught for Israel, as it was at various points in its war in Gaza, then I think there will be pressure to censor content critical of Israel. So yeah, it's anti-Semitic, and Musk himself has done some of that. Having promised, I'm a free speech absolutist, to show that he really wasn't, and he was made to eat crow. He had to go to Auschwitz. He had to go do a mea culpa, go on his knees to Auschwitz, because he was told, "Hey, this is unacceptable. You can't allow anti-Semitic content on X." So I think it just depends on the future. I think if things become difficult for Israel, yeah, there's going to be a lot of pressure on Musk to start censoring content critical of Israel. The stuff that the putting Pahlavi's nonsense on Khamenei's X account. I mean, that's just so utterly stupid. I don't know what he thinks he's achieving thereby, yeah. So that I mean, it's really pathetic. And the Shah himself. I mean, he had relations with. I mean, he maintained diplomatic relations with Israel, but the Shah was never that much of a big fan of Israel. I mean, you can probably find the interview that he gave on 60 Minutes. I'm talking about Reza Pahlavi's dad. He gave this interview on 60 Minutes to whatever the guy that's the Chris Mike Wallace. He was interviewed by Mike Wallace, and he said there, "Hey, Israel has undue influence on American life." And Mike Wallace purported to be shocked. What kind of thing? You can't say that. What do you mean on undue influence? I say, yeah, it's undue influence. Because money and power. So your Israel lobby in the United States. So he said this in the 1970s. So you know, so now I don't know what the son thinks. I mean, the son may be a different case because he's probably being elevated by the Zionist forces to be the new leader of Iran. So he can't say that. But it's just interesting that his dad actually blurted things out about the influence of the Israel lobby. And then Cynthia says, while reporting that the US is freezing visas for 75 countries, Fox News spotlights only 3: Somalia, Russia, and Iran, neatly sandwiching Russia between the other 2 in case viewers miss the implied axis of evil. The axis of evil, okay, Somalia, Russia, and Iran. Okay, so Somalia is now in the axis of evil. The other 72 countries, many U.S. allies far outside any such axis, go unmentioned. Even Fox viewers might see this as whitewashing the Trump administration, but one omission stands out. Why isn't North Korea on the list? Well, I don't know whether how easy it is for North Koreans, first of all, to leave their country and apply for visas to visit the United States. So I think, it may be one of the 72 countries. I don't know, but I doubt whether too many North Koreans come to the United States. Maybe some business arrangements or diplomats or something. But otherwise, I wouldn't have thought this was a. But what's striking there is the case of Russia, because it's almost impossible for Russians now anyway to get visas. So it's just peculiar to mention Russians. I mean, it is very, very hard, almost impossible, and has been incidentally for some time, for Russians to get visas to visit the United States, or indeed get visas to visit European countries. That's all, new visas. I mean, if you already were issued with a visa some time ago, and therefore it's a recurring visa, then that's fine. But a new visa, I think it's almost impossible. So I'm not sure that that's such a big deal to say, oh, Russia, the freezing visas on Russia. I mean, that it's already been in place. Anyway, thank you, Cynthia, as always. And then the Summer Petros, good to see you, Summer Petros. I'll be seeing you quite soon in Budapest. And Summer Petros asks, what is next on the menu after Greenland? Iceland, Norway, lots of energy resources, lots of cash, small population. Well, I think as the question by Stone River, what's next? I think Canada, parts of Canada. As I say, I don't think it's the whole thing, but it's going to take parts of Canada, which I think are digestible. They can take pieces of Canada, and I think that would along with Greenland and with Panama, then Trump will say, yeah, I've had a successful presidency. So that would, and Canada's of course that's also very resource rich. So that would be quite a prize. I don't know that whether Trump particularly wants Iceland, though. Interesting with Norway, he has this thing. You remember when he has this thing about physical beauty, and this kind of thing that he always brings up, like how good-looking Norwegians and Swedes are. So I think he would be thinking not so much about the resources, but hey, we're going to suddenly absorb into America lots of tall, good-looking, blonde people. That I think that would be a consideration. Remember when he was talking to those members of Congress and he talked about the shithole countries and said, "How come we only get people from shithole countries? Why don't we ever get Norwegians coming into our country?" So, um, but I'm not sure that that's on the cards. I think what's on the cards, I think, is parts of Canada and and Panama. I think, but I don't think it's going to be Iceland or Norway. At least at the moment, I don't see it. Anyway, Aristotle, good to see you. Says a few thoughts on Putin. The downside of Putin precedes the war. It is taking the West at face value. I encounter similar Europhile views when I worked in Russia. Yeah, unfortunately, that's going. And Putin is part of that. Yeah, there was a failure to understand that the U.S. was an opponent. Yep. You seem to argue that Putin has gone soft. I don't think so. It was amazing. But I didn't say he had gone soft. I said that I mean, I agree with you. I think he was always a Westerner. I think he was, or at least not a Westerner, a Westernizer. He was always eager to improve relations with the West, and I think he was always, his prize was the special relationship between Russia and Germany. You know, Russia with its abundant natural resources are aligned with German manufacturing know-how. I mean, that was the plan. You know, so the Germans would invest in in Russia. You know, his plan was a little like what China did. You know, China also kind of became this global workshop, having people investing there, and that all helped. You know, China become an economic superpower, and I think Russia was thinking along those lines, using essentially, particularly German manufacturing know-how, but also obviously American know-how, and to make Russia something like China become an economic superpower. That didn't work out, that was his outlook. That was he was always um, a Westernizer, and at each moment, even before this, the 2022, he was eager to work with the Western countries, and particularly to work with Angela Merkel and the rest of them. And we talked before, particularly with Paul Craig Roberts the other day, how in 2014, when it should have been obvious that this onslaught, Western-sponsored onslaught against Viktor Yanukovych, was going to lead to a catastrophe, he held back, and he aligned himself with Angela Merkel in in calling for uh, restraint on both sides. He was calling for restraint on the part of Yanukovych. And so, to anyone outsider, to me, and to anyone who's saying this is the last thing you want is restraint, Yanukovych needs to use whatever force is necessary to bring this thing to an end. Just like Iran's rulers use whatever force is necessary to survive, because this is a big thing. This is obviously being sponsored by the West. The only way you're going to get your hands around this is by using whatever force is necessary to bring this insurrection to an end. And Putin was urging the restraint. He was urging the non-use of force. And of course, Angela Merkel was eager to issue a joint statement with Putin. Oh yeah, we want restraint. We're against the use of force to bring this Maidan to an end. So Putin joins Merkel in essentially telling Yanukovych, don't use force. We're not going to support you if you use force. Well, we know the outcome. Anyway, I don't think so. This is where Putin's gone soft. So I never said he's gone soft. I said he was always a Westernizer. I don't think so. It was amazing to me how reckless and fanatical Europeans were after the war started. Putin's issue is how to deal with fanatical morons with nuclear weapons. Putin is someone to trust facing this. Well, you can take that point of view, but you can also take the view, I think articulated very well by Paul Craig Roberts, and I think I agree with him, is that Putin's lack of response has encouraged the fanatics. If there'd been a strong response early on, the fanatics would have cooled their heels and decided not to go down this path. And by having a weak response again and again, that has only fed the fanaticism. Um, and this is what was different about the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union made clear from the start, you don't mess with us. We are ready to use nuclear weapons. No one really doubted that. They didn't have to, you know, saber rattle. They didn't have to say, well, any minute now we're going to use nuclear weapons. It was implicit in the attitudes of the Soviet leaders that they were going to do this. Um, but if you don't inspire fear among your opponents, then of course you are encouraging all the fanatics, because they're saying, hey, this guy's a pushover. So, why don't we go a little further? And of course, step by step, the Westerners went further and further. And then Aristotle said, I agree, incidentally, that not fully mobilizing was a mistake. Without Johnson, though, the war would have been a success. Relying on Wagner was also dubious. Yeah, relying on Wagner, but that's what happens when you fight wars on the cheap, and that's always the hey, we'll do it. We'll have private contractors, and then we don't have to conscripts. Everyone was afraid of conscript. Who how's the country going to respond to mobilization? Well, if it's an existential fight, which is what Putin has been claiming, then the country will respond positively to mobilization. But you can't have both. You can't say, well, it's existential. The West is out to destroy us. But at the same time, it's only going to the only people who need to fight are the people whom we're going to pay. So you sign up and you get a big bonus. That doesn't sound existential. That means it sounds like it's just a regular fight, and you're hiring mercenaries. Anyway, my time is up. So my apologies again for the I don't have to apologize. I mean, but apologies on behalf of the Gaggle that Peter wasn't able to join. The internet is a real issue these days in Russia. Tomorrow, will be my solo. I hope you'll be able to join me, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So I hope to see you then. And until then, all the best. Thank you. Goodbye.